first session is with someone that truly needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Mike Ward has been writing, analysing and commenting on the life sciences industry for over 35 years, both as a journalist and as an analyst. His insights have supported stakeholders across pharma, biotech, healthcare, medtech to understand market trends and news on a deeper level. Mike will be delivering his traditional winners and losers presentation, giving us a look back at what has gone well and what hasn't in 2024 for the life sciences sector. So please join me in welcoming Mike to the stage.
Right, how to get this to work? It's a good job I was a writer and not a tech person. Yeah, as Russell said, I've been sort of writing about the industry for a long, long time, and it was interesting to hear David Stubbs, with all those sort of investment bankers and analysts and venture capitalists all being, sort of almost, insanely optimistic. As a journalist covering the life sciences space, I think that sometimes people think journalists are cynical or skeptical, but in fact, really, we're just disappointed optimists. And I think that some of the slides I'll show will actually echo some of the things that David said. What I'm hoping is that the way that I put the slides together, they will be easier to read, to understand. So because all those graphs, etc. Sometimes you sort of think, well, actually, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I've tried to make it as simple as possible. So here we go. Excellent. So this is just to put it into context. 2024, so that's year to date, so that's like November last week, and you can sort of see that this year the global biotech industry is it's going to be about the third best year. So, and we can really sort of forget about the sort of the outliers. So in many respects, as David sort of said, there is finance for the industry. The problem is, of course, because of all the finance that was raised in 2020 and 2021, where lots and lots of companies were created, etc., there's a horrible overhang because they all had 2 or 3 years runway. So we can actually now sort of see that that's now. So there's going to be a huge amount of capital that's required. Also, one of the things that we've seen is the actual number of deals that have actually been done actually has gone down. So as sort of David said, what we're actually sort of seeing is we're seeing, companies, the companies who are getting money are actually able to raise more money than before. And just to echo on what was said on the last panel, when you're sort of talking about the sort of the culture, I think that the difference between European venture capitalists and American venture capitalists is that American venture capitalists tend to back teams. So they will give them a huge bolus of cash and say, hey guys, go and do something. If something doesn't work, well, switch to plan B. Whereas my observation of the way that sort of a lot of European venture capitalists operate is that they tend to back assets. And if the asset fails, then that's it. It's the end of the story. So, one of the things we can sort of say, and again, it was sort of shown earlier, the IPO market has been pretty lackluster. There have been some IPOs. The numbers that David showed were essentially what was going on in the US. There's actually been quite a bit of activity in South Korea and in Taiwan. So it isn't, but in Europe, it was actually pretty slow. And as I sort of say, the sort of the VC financing is pretty robust at the moment. So this is the I put it on all on the sort of same slide. So you can actually sort of see, roughly it's been pretty volatile for everybody, but the sort of the biotech is underperforming. And there are a number of reasons for that. One has been, in fact, the sort of the IPO class of 2021, 2022. David sort of mentioned it's like they're all underwater. Fortunately, during this year, 60% of actually are above water, but still, 2 out of 5 are still actually sort of struggling to provide a return on investment for their investors. And here it's sort of calling out. So and you can sort of see some big names here. You've got Moderna. Well, Moderna is obviously struggling because it no longer has the sort of the COVID dividend, and it's sort of struggling to convince people of what its ambitions are. Evotech has had its problems, and in fact has had sort of potential bidder sort of have a look, kick the tires, and then allegedly walk away. So some of this is just the sort of the churn of business plans that have not quite met investor or analyst expectations. But sometimes companies cause themselves. So Cassiva Sciences is a really bad story. So these are losers who might sort of undermine confidence in the biotech space. It's a company that was developing an Alzheimer's drug, but unfortunately all the data was actually falsified. They managed to raise huge sums of money, but ended up with a huge valuation. I mean, it's still doing sort of got about 150 million market cap, but it's one of these where the SEC have investigated it, and essentially these are the kind of guys that we don't need. And then on the other side, we've got all the ones who have sort of done really well. So you've got, so for example, Longboard. That's the one that's if they closed the deal last week, they would have been on a slide later on, but they've just been acquired by Lundbeck. It's a neuroscience company. Monopar Therapeutics is in radio pharmaceuticals, and Summit put out some pretty cool clinical trial results of they've got a PD-1 VEGF bispecific antibody that actually is performing really well against Keytruda, which is obviously sort of the gold standard. So those are the sort of the good and the poor performing biotech stocks of 2024. Another loser, 23andMe. This, I mean, it's like once you've had your DNA done, you don't need to go back, do you? So it was a kind of business model was a little bit flawed. I love the fact that Richard Branson had his fingers in this pie, and you can sort of see that they once had a market value of $6 billion, and they're now sort of trading at about $83 million. The CEO, that's Anne Wojcicki, she went to her board and sort of said, "I want to take the company private." And they all resigned en masse. So this is a company, she does believe that she can pull it back. But, I sort of think that you've got to have a lot of confidence in yourself to be able to sort of think you're going to be able to bring investors back. So let's have just a little deep dive into the VC financing, because this is where most of you guys are going to be in terms of looking to raise new money. What's actually interesting is that in this year, for the past few years and for about the past 10 years, the US has accounted for about 66% of all private and venture capital going into biotech. This year, its share has increased to 75%. That's partly because we've seen the Chinese investments have dropped off in the VC space during 2024. So it's down at 7%, whereas in recent years it's been up as about 15%, 16%. Europe's share has also sort of dropped slightly, but the UK actually still is the sort of the dominant player, sort of accounting for about a third of the money that's going into the sector. So as you can sort of see, and in terms of the sort of the amount of money, it's actually on par with where we were, in the run up to the pandemic. So I thought it'd be worth also just sort of showing sort of data around best-selling drugs, and Keynote is up there at 25 billion, but you can sort of see that Ozempic is already sort of like moving up the charts quite quickly, and in fact, if you look at the sort of the run rate it's got at the moment, at 32% year on year, the growth, it's likely to move, maybe into second place. Similarly, you've got right at the bottom, you've got Trulicity from Lilly. It's going backwards, but Mounjaro posted $8 billion in the first 9 months of this year. So obviously, it's already going to be in that top 10, and it's likely to again be sort of shooting way up. And this is something that nobody's surprised at. The sort of the weight loss drugs are having a sort of huge amount of excitement, and in fact, so much so that Eli Lilly has got a market cap of $750 billion. So it's the largest, by market cap, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, followed by Novo Nordisk. In fact, Novo Nordisk, it's the Novo Foundation, which kind of owns Novo Nordisk. Its valuation is on a par with the GDP of Denmark. I mean, it's just like it's sort of a phenomenal situation. And what we can sort of see is that the with those companies, 750 billion. It sounds like a lot. That's 80 times its PE ratio. So it's like it's trading way high. But of course, this is dwarfed by the likes of Nvidia, Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, who are all much bigger. So the other interesting one that I'd like to point out is Pfizer. 146 billion it's valued. Okay, it's in 10th place. It used to be way at the top. 146 billion. Just think of how much money they have spent on acquisitions, right, in the last 10, 20 years. I mean, they spent 40 odd billion last year, and they've got a market capitalization of 146 billion. So it's no wonder that activist investors are sniffing around there. So so GLPs, at the moment, everybody's sort of just excited about the weight loss, but in fact, there are a whole bunch of other reasons why this product class looks really interesting, because it actually, all the data that's coming through the clinical trials actually shows that it's going to have a huge impact on sort of the healthcare of populations. And the really exciting thing is the one at the bottom with sort of like potential impact on inflammatory diseases and maybe even Alzheimer's disease progression. So so this all looks good. However, it's not all rosy in the GLP-1 garden. So Thomas Land, who's sort of the search and evaluation guy at Novo Nordisk, basically, he says that they need to have a better next generation molecules. So they can be taken orally, that they don't have to be taken all the time, but they can be sort of extended release, etc. Reduce the gastrointestinal impact, that the side effects that are associated with it, and also actually try and sort out the muscle mass loss, which is also associated with GLP-1s. So there's still a lot of potential activity. So let's go back to losers. So CMS earlier this year published its list of the drugs that are going to be first, negotiated pricing, starting January the 1st, 2026. Now, the numbers that we've got there, negotiated price and list price, it's not quite right, because of course nobody really cares about the list price. It's actually about what the net price is. But unfortunately, CMS didn't actually tell us what those were. But you can sort of see these are the 10. Now, some of them, well, these drugs are going off patent like soon anyway, so it's not necessarily a problem. But actually, for two of the companies, Bristol Myers with Eliquis and Boehringer Ingelheim with Jardiance, these drugs have still got a few years left on their before this loss of exclusivity, and actually they account for a huge chunk of the revenues of those companies. So those two companies could have a bit of a challenge, and also although it might change with the new administration, there are plans to add to the list of drugs that will be subject to negotiation by the CMS. But on a positive note, FDA approvals, the new drug approvals, are actually again, pretty much on a par with where we've seen. So we're seeing innovative drugs. What is really interesting, though, is 48% of all the new drugs that have been approved this year are actually developed by biotech companies and taken to the regulator by biotech companies and will be commercialized by biotech companies. 48%. And then, if you look at the chart, what you actually sort of see is that the in-house, the drugs that are actually pharmaceutical companies do in-house is only that amount. So the other 52% of the drugs that the pharmaceutical companies have taken to the regulators, et cetera, again, a huge chunk of those actually again came from biotech. So the biotech sector is actually accounting for 75% of all the new drugs, and that's why this sector is really, really important, and why obviously it's also very, very attractive. For example, on the M&A front, and here are some of the sort of the big acquisitions that have taken place. In recent years, for 5, 6, 7 years at the end of the last decade, oncology was just totally dominated a lot of the BD activity and M&A, etc. Whereas now we're actually sort of seeing that the pharma companies are actually looking to get into other spaces. So, for example, the one at the top, Bristol Myers and Karuna, this was to access some very, very exciting neuroscience opportunities, particularly in the schizophrenia field. The other thing I think is worth pointing out is if we look at the sort of the trend, what was because there aren't that many phase 3 assets and commercial assets available anymore. What we're seeing is a much sort of a pivoting towards well, a lot of deals involving phase 2 assets in 2024. So again, those if you've got phase 2 assets, you're going to be flavor of the month. And then sort of the other place where pharmaceutical companies are getting assets is obviously with the with partnerships. Novartis has been, as you can sort of see, has been really, really busy. And if you sort of look at the sort of things it's going for radioligand therapeutics. It's going for molecular glue degraders. It's going for bispecific antibodies. It's all these other modalities that are also pretty exciting. So there's a lot of opportunity. It isn't just the oncology space anymore. And of course, again, a sort of an interesting one is this deal that GSK did with Flagship. So Flagship Pioneering. This is a big fund, and what they like to do is they like to create new companies, and they've got a portfolio of 40 companies. And essentially, they've kind of got together with GSK and sort of said, well, okay, can we sort of share all your smarts in terms of, how you develop drugs and how you sort of, move them through the process. And we'll do some sort of sweetheart deals in terms of like options for those. So I think that's a really, really interesting idea. Other pharmaceutical companies, they actually set up their own little hubs. So J&J, for example, has done that. Lilly has also been sort of very active in that space. So I think that's an interesting model that they're going for. And then just to sort of reiterate, here are some of the other, when you look at sort of the deals, what people are actually looking at. When I've been sort of, later on, we're going to be talking, there's a panel where we're going to sort of say, oh, well, what are we going to be talking about in 2025? And one of the things that I've been really, really surprised at is the rise of China. We've seen it in terms of the amount of investment that has gone into Chinese companies. We've seen this shift as they've gone from being sort of a low-cost producer to actually producing innovative drugs, and they account the CDMOs there account for a huge amount of the supply chain of the world. So therefore, one of the sort of the big challenges that the pharmaceutical industry is going to have to come to terms with over the next 5-6 years is the impact of the US Biosecure Act. So what this does is it basically sort of says, we are not going to give you money, or we're not going to work with you if you have a relationship with a company that we think is too closely associated with a power that we think is hostile. And what they actually did was that they named these 4 companies as, you definitely can't work with these guys. And you can sort of see that, Wuxi Aptec, it saw its share price drop 32.3%. Wuxi Biologics down 49.6%. These other 2 guys, they're private. But this is going to create challenges in terms of supply chain. There could be winners. It could be South Korea could benefit from this. India might possibly benefit from this. But again, it'll be interesting to sort of see what happens with the Trump administration. Because although there's been obviously a lot of anti-China or China, that's the only impression I'm going to be doing today. But yeah, sort of anti-Chinese rhetoric, because these guys are so embedded. It's going to be interesting to sort of see how particularly the US industry untangles itself. One of the things that I saw recently at the Buyer Europe meeting was that there was a huge number of people from China going to that European meeting. And I wouldn't be surprised if we sort of see almost like a pivoting, and the Chinese will work more with Europeans. It will also be focusing actually on their domestic market, because that is actually going pretty gangbusters. I mean, some of the sort of data, the science that's been done in China is amazing. This is from a report that we just published, which looks at what has actually happened in the last decade since the Chinese government had one of its 5-year plans of it's going to be a life sciences superpower. I think we heard that somewhere before, but I think the Chinese might actually try it out. But you can sort of see that the Chinese research, it's up there in terms of their share of publications in all these sort of key areas, whether it's cell biology or oncology. Interestingly, a lot of these Chinese researchers actually don't collaborate with other researchers anywhere, whereas in fact we know that collaboration, particularly sort of like multinational collaborations, actually underpins a lot of really, really good science. And then just to sort of give you a sort of a sense of this is highly cited researchers. This is again sort of data that is compiled by Clarivate, and this is those top researchers in top publications who get the most citations. And you can sort of see that mainland China is definitely up there at 17.9%. If George is here, he'll be pleased to see that the UK is in third place. So actually pretty punchy below the weight. Now I was thinking that I was going to name this the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's kind of interesting because one is, I mean, the nominations have got to be actually accepted, so it's not necessarily a given, and it's possible that in fact they've just done this just to scare people, right? And actually it's not real. But interestingly, if you actually look at the sort of things like the FDA and CMS and sort of the American health system, it isn't great, right? It does need somebody to sort of be disruptive to shake it up. A bit like what George was saying about Wes Streeton, sort of saying, the NHS is broke, we need to fix it. So it could be that in fact these guys actually might do some good. It's just the fact that they're anti-vaxxers, etc., is a bit of a challenge. And in fact, sort of the share prices of all the vaccine companies when these guys were announced, it just fell away. So it's pretty scary. So the Trump administration, again, the sort of the mood music, right, at pharma conferences is what it is, okay? And in fact, there are potentially some aspects of a Trump administration that actually pharmaceutical companies might like. One is, sort of like, reduced taxation. Another is, a lighter hand of the FTC. So therefore, we might actually, what David was sort of saying earlier on about, this year might be the year for M&A. Well, it could be, because actually there's a less of a heavy hand. Okay, this is my last slide. I can see you. So again, later on, we're going to be talking about what we're looking out for. Here are some pretty cool molecules or drugs that actually I think could be game changers in their space, and I'll be writing about these more. Anyway, so that's me. Thank you.
much.